Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible Hour podcast. I'm sitting here getting ready to turn on the microphone, and my buddy Adam from northern Colorado sends me a couple of pictures looking out the window at his place toward the mountains, and it's a pretty amazing image. Half of the sky is blue like a perfect autumn day. The other half of the sky is just this flume of black smoke rolling off of the mountains up there. They've been having this fire going on for a while, and they were like 56% contained yesterday, I think I heard. But then we had huge wind overnight up here in the Black Hills of South Dakota and all the way down into Colorado coming off the mountains, and it whipped this fire up into a crazy frenzy. And I feel awful for the people who've been down there for weeks battling this, because what are you fighting right now? You're fighting the wind, literally the wind, something that is the inevitable physical product of the fact that high pressure and low pressure can exist on the same planet. And when they do, gases want to move from the high pressure place to the low pressure place. And every now and then the disparity between the two is greater, and therefore the wind moves faster in its rush to equalize those two things. And again, if you're those guys, what can you do? It's a violence that is inevitable. You put these two forces in close proximity, and there's going to be this exchange of pressure, and it's going to manifest in a way that can cause anything ranging from light messes to disastrous messes if you're battling a fire as they are right now. And likewise, in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus, for the second time in as many chapters, is talking about this inevitable friction, this tension that comes with the arrival of the kingdom. He hit on this in Matthew 10 and verse 34. Remember a couple of weeks ago we spent time on this. Don't suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. And then he references back to something in Micah chapter 7 where he says, for I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. This is very detailed. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. And when we broke this down together a couple of weeks ago, we came away with a pretty clear understanding from the context that Jesus isn't saying, like, I want to make everything worse, like your world seemed like it was way too good. No, this is a redemptive mission that he's on, and the kingdom is bringing beautiful values. It's bringing the values that everybody wants, regardless of their background or political or philosophical affiliation. But he's talking about, again, an inevitability, a thing that just cannot be avoided when you put these two pressures in close proximity. And then we bounce over here to Matthew 11, and we get Jesus' vigorous defense of the character of John the Baptist and the role of John the Baptist. He says, I tell you, among those born of women, there hasn't risen one greater than John the Baptist, yet he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. So the worst seat on the kingdom train is better than the best seat on the Old Testament train. But then he goes on to say, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advancing, and forceful men lay hold of it. So here we go again. One page after the last time he brought it up, Jesus is reprising this motif of violence surrounding the kingdom, but he's never advocating for it. I mean, at no point in anything we've seen from him so far is Jesus saying like, well, I mean, you got to break a few eggs to make a kingdom omelet. I mean, we're going to have to kill some people, obviously. We're going to have to take over some governments and execute some people who have bad theology, depose some rulers who rule improperly or unjustly. Nah, it's nothing like that. And every single time one of Jesus' followers takes up the sword or starts to rattle the saber verbally, Jesus is the one who smacks it down. And in one case, Jesus even puts physically back together a part of a body that got cut off by someone doing violence in the name of Jesus. No, we're just not doing that. It would seem that Jesus meant what he said when he was talking about loving your enemy being a value of the kingdom a few chapters back, and he hasn't deviated from that. So if all the context tells us that Jesus is opposed to violence in order to advance the kingdom, then why does he keep lumping violence in with kingdom stuff so often? And I think it's abundantly clear he's dealing with that question of inevitability. You put these two pressures together, and you're going to see the wind blow. You're going to see some fireworks. And if we're talking about the wind, the two competing forces that make that violence occur would be the high pressure and the low pressure. But here, Jesus is talking about the two competing forces being the world kingdom and its values and its currencies and its agendas, and the kingdom and its values and its currencies and its agendas. They are not compatible. They're predicated on completely different assumptions. One is predicated on the belief that you are a factory that converts food into poop to buy more time to be alive, and that eventually you die and you get what you can get along the way, and maybe you find some meaning and some beauty in there somewhere. But ultimately, people are this fleeting thing created in the image of chaos and chance, and you get what you can get out of it while you have the opportunity to get stuff out of it, and any meaning that you find in it is something that you inflict on life and existence. Those are foundational world kingdom assumptions, and built on top of those assumptions will be world kingdom values that are rooted in the brevity of life, the high value on pleasure and seeking the elevation of the self. But if you flip over to the kingdom, well, that's predicated on the idea that this life is not all there is, that people have tremendous value that is inflicted upon them from the outside, not generated spontaneously by the people themselves, because people are made not in the image of chaos or chance, but they're made in the image of God, the first mover, the first creator, the first cause, the thing that made it so that there's something instead of nothing. And with that comes significance and purpose that even transcends this physical body and this moment that we draw breath on this physical plane. Those kingdom presuppositions are going to lead to a different set of kingdom values. It'll affect what you think about other people. It'll affect how you treat other people. It'll affect how you deal in the realm of ideas. It'll affect how you think about your money and your time and your resources and pleasure and diversion and morality and justice. And ultimately, these things are going to overlap a little bit, but mostly these are two very different understandings of who we are and what we're doing here. And look, I don't think the people who are sitting here right now having this conversation with us who don't think there's a God and who would say, no, I really resonated more with your world kingdom assumptions that you reeled off first. I don't think you're dumb or bad or dishonest. I think you're reading the data a certain way, and you're trying to live a life that is consistent with what you believe at the most fundamental level to be true. You kingdom people who do things differently than I do and understand the kingdom a little differently than I do, and maybe you do religion a little differently than I do, or read the Bible a little differently than I don't think you are bad or dishonest either. I think you read the text differently than I do on a few points. Maybe you were raised around different pressures or religious points of emphasis than I was on certain points. Look, what I'm trying to do here is just put my hands out like Chris Pratt with the Velociraptors and be like, okay, cool, this is a point where sometimes we get real mad at each other and it gets weird, and I don't think we need to. Because I do think most people would like to be consistent and are trying to reconcile what they understand about the world to how they live and where they find meaning in things. My point here is not to say one group dumb, one group smart, or I'm the only one who knows what I'm talking about and everybody should just think and do things just like me. What I'm trying to say is, look, this is a high pressure and a low pressure. Even if for a moment I step back and pretend that I don't think the kingdom thing is truer and realer and I'm just a totally neutral observer, I have to acknowledge that these are different pressures, these are different systems, and that there is going to be a natural tension, violence, shifting of pressure between these two things that cannot be avoided because they just don't neatly overlap. So when Jesus says stuff like, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advancing and forceful men lay hold of it, I don't think we take that to mean that Jesus would like to see more bloodshed and swords and guns and death. I think what we take that to mean is that Jesus is a pretty good philosophical meteorologist. He knows what happens when you put these two sets of pressures together, and he knows that that violence and that friction is inevitable. And I think what he's clearly saying here is that since John was doing his stuff, which had been a few years by the time that he's saying these things in Matthew chapter 11, we've seen a lot more friction and a different brand of friction than what we saw back in the day before the time of John the Baptist. So I think he's doing a couple of things here. One is acknowledging the inevitability and telling people don't freak out because of this friction. this must happen. There's an inevitability here in the same way that the wind is inevitable. What are you going to do? But second, I think he's also subtly bouncing back to the earlier question he answered in Matthew chapter 11, where John sends his followers and he's like, could you see if Jesus is the one that I'm supposed to expect, or should I expect somebody else? And Jesus goes on, he's like, well, go back and tell John about all of this stuff. The blind can see now, the lame can walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf are hearing, the good news is preached to the poor. And he lists off all of these characteristics that say, hey, like the kingdom is happening right now. Well, I think he's hearkening back to that in these remarks in support of John the Baptist to say, well, here's further evidence that the kingdom is happening. Look at these frictions that must occur. If these frictions weren't here, then all you're getting is some religious branding slapped over the top of another world system thing predicated on world system assumptions. But because the foundational assumptions are different, it's precisely because those foundational assumptions are different between the two that you are seeing this friction. So it's further evidence that, yep, this is actually the kingdom. And third, I think he's still propping up John and saying, hey, everybody's worked up. Why is that? Is it because John the Baptist is a really effective fraud who tricked people into getting worked up? Or is it because John the Baptist is the harbinger of the kingdom? Remember, this whole block of thought is still happening in service of a defense of John the Baptist's record as a prophet. Bottom line, high pressure, low pressure, there's no getting around it. There's going to be wind. There's going to be violence that comes out of that. Likewise, world kingdom assumptions, world kingdom values versus kingdom assumptions and kingdom values. There's an equally, if not even more so, inevitable friction, even violence that is going to unfold there as people push back on it and as the kingdom has to forcefully dip a shoulder into the wind and squint and press through all of that resistance that pushes against it from the natural world kingdom assumptions. For some odd reason, a whole bunch of you have decided to support this program at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. And I want you to know that that is hyper encouraging to me and hyper motivating to me and also hyper helpful to my family. So thank you to everybody who supports the program at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. And thank you also to everybody who doesn't. I'm ridiculously glad that we get to do this together. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do it again soon.